Hello, and welcome to episode 1 of Bills. This is your host, Luke Scorzel. Now, as this is the first ever podcast for Bills, I'll go over what we will be doing. Throughout this podcast, we will learn about different government bills and legislation going through Congress right now. So, for instance, the 115th Congress may introduce a bill, and we will review the bill as to whether it is good policy or what the policy means for us as citizens of this country. And hopefully by the end, understand how our government works and how a bill passes through Congress and legislation. So without further ado, let's get started. Today we will go over H.R. 6506, which is the President's responsibility to pay for additional security costs on property owned by the President. Now, the bill explicitly states that it is to provide that the President shall be financially responsible for any additional security measures imposed on property in which the President holds an ownership interest and for other purposes. Now, to get a grasp on this, let's look at the costs of what it takes to protect a president and how much a president really makes. So, the president, no matter how rich or how poor, would have to pay for his own security when on property that the president receives or may receive dividends or distributions from. That is what the bill says explicitly. So there's no variation as to if a president makes $100,000 a year or makes $100 million a year. So Trump's net worth is actually the sum of all other presidents combined, according to Forbes. And we only see that in history that nine presidents had a net worth under 1 million, which is already adjusted for inflation. And some of those presidents include Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, and Harry Truman. So before we go into the costs of security, you have to understand that these people would have to pay, these presidents would need to be paying for their own security when on property that they own. Sounds a little ridiculous. And half of all presidents have had a net worth under $20 million, including Reagan, Obama, Carter, Ford, and Eisenhower. And a majority have been worth under $30 million. And only 8 have been worth over $100 million. So while we talk about the costs of security, keep this all in mind, because this is where we find the true implications of what this bill actually means. So the cost of security between October 1st, 2016 and January 20th, 2016, the Secret Service budget has already been $72 million for Donald Trump, according to Politico. So it's already cost over what many of our past presidents have been worth to keep Donald Trump safe while at his home residence in New York. So that may apply to the bill, because this bill is kind of reactionary to the major costs that New York City is facing to protect Donald Trump before he goes into the Oval Office. So it cost $8 million to protect Obama on a Hawaii vacation, according to Judicial Watch. Security for the Bushes cost $800 million in fiscal year 2008, according to White House aide Bradley H. Patterson Jr. So the bottom line is that it costs much, much more to protect the president than they actually make. So the cost really matters here, because if the president doesn't make enough money to pay for his own security, then is he not allowed to go on vacation? Does he not have security if he does go on vacation? What are the implications of this bill? Because it really doesn't cover a lot of the substance and the big questions that we would ask. So, and then we have to ask ourselves why the cost matters. And it's because protecting the president, no matter where he is, if he's on private property or federal property, it is the duty of our nation to protect the president, because he is the most valuable person in the world in keeping and maintaining diplomatic relations with other countries and protecting our own self-interest. So it's not the president's responsibility to pay for his security if he wants to go on vacation. We all need vacations. We're more productive when we take time off. So it kind of creates another responsibility for the president to take on. One that he or she might not be able to afford. So, and that has a very significant impact on who even runs for the presidency, because people who can't pay this massive bill to protect themselves might decide, I might be qualified, I might be very qualified, I might represent the majority of Americans in my ideals and opinions and how I've been raised and the environment that I've been surrounded with, but I can't pay for security, I can't pay for a campaign, so I'm just not going to run. Essentially, it limits the opportunity for those with modest worth to become president or even run for president. So essentially, it kind of allows an easier way for the rich, not bad, but an easier way for more wealthy and affluent people to enter the presidency, taking out kind of the modest competition. So Marco Rubio had a net worth of around $100,000. So maybe he wouldn't have run for president, or if he did become president, then what would have happened if he couldn't pay those massive security costs? Would we give him, like, I don't know, security from a department store that's not that expensive and not experienced? I don't know what the implications from this bill are for that question. So now we're forcing them to pay for their campaign costs and then the security as well. So we might as well close the door for those with humble beginnings to run. People who can't pay for these things just simply aren't going to run. People already aren't running because it costs way too much to campaign. So, but all of that's not to say that there aren't maybe positive aspects of this bill. It could limit the time spent vacationing on during the presidency. Donald Trump has already said that he's not going to take vacations while he's president, which could increase productivity or it could decrease productivity depending on how much vacation time and time off the president needs, which, I mean, we have to be honest with ourselves. Everyone needs a little bit of time off. This could save taxpayers a small amount of money or a large, I mean, $800 million is a lot of money for one person to pay, but the whole nation, not really so much. But it could have a small amount of benefit to the taxpayers. That's an argument. So again, yeah, what if they can't afford it? If a candidate runs and wins but can't afford security outside of the White House, what happens? And these are questions that we need to ask ourselves when reading bills and when reading legislation, because it can't just be something that, oh, we'll come to that when it's time. It needs to be answered within the bill. I would say I wouldn't vote on a bill like this if there were no answers to tough questions like that inside the bill. So maybe it would be edited and amended later on in the process of becoming a law, if it becomes law. But this does seem kind of reactionary to the Trump presidency. So would they go into debt if they couldn't pay it off? Would they just not have security? That doesn't seem logical. I don't think that would happen. Maybe they wouldn't be able to take vacations. They're all important questions that we have to ask ourselves, and this resolution or this bill doesn't really address this. So then we also have to look at why this bill could possibly exist. Mr. Grayson's bill is a reaction to the presumed cost of Trump and his family's security. So before there was a problem with Obama and now it's a problem with Trump. When the president is elected and before they take the White House, they are living in their private residence. So Mr. Trump is living in Trump Tower right now. Obama lived in Illinois, in Chicago. So the Secret Service has to spend money to protect them in their home residence before they take the Oval Office. And coincidentally, New York costs much, much more than it did to protect Mr. Obama and his private residence. It's costing over $1 million a day to protect the new first family, according to the National Review and CNN. That's a lot of money, but our president is very valuable and we should be protecting him. And New York is a very big, big city where there are more risks to Mr. Trump. He's living in a building with other people living in it. That could be a problem. They have to block off whole streets. It's a busy city, so a lot of money is needed. And Chicago, the Chicago Police Department spent around $2.2 million to protect Obama from his election on November 5th, 2008 to his inauguration on January 18th, 2009. That's according to the National Review. So obviously, it cost a fraction to protect President Obama than it did to protect Mr. Trump. So that's drawing big questions as to whether taxpayers should have to take on this cost. Now, the federal government is probably going to bail out a lot of this cost that it's costing the NYPD to protect Trump. So that's going to be taken off as a burden. But I still believe that our country and the people that elected Donald Trump should be funding it with our tax dollars. I don't think it's really feasible. Maybe it's feasible for Mr. Trump to pay for his security over this whole time period, but to ask other presidents in the future to pay this kind of bill, that's a lot of money. And then while they're president as well, if they're spending a lot of money on vacations, or if they just take some vacations and they don't have enough money to pay for security, then it's kind of a big problem. So, and this is also Melania Trump is going to stay with Barron Trump in New York until at least he finishes his school year, which would be after Donald Trump takes the White House. So, kind of framing what this bill was proposed, why it was proposed, it's an interesting bill, and I think that we'll see it come back again in this 115th Congress sometime soon, so we can look at the results of that. So just keep in mind how you would vote on this bill and what you think about the facts and the cost of this bill. So overall, I would reject this resolution simply because it is short-sighted and it could impact the presidency significantly, both in the present and in the future. Remember that it is our country's duty to protect those who are representing us in our government. And that's a very, very big and significant part of this. So, all right. So that is the end of today's episode. Be sure to check back next week to see